Hi everyone, this is lesson 6 in Chiasmus. Today we're talking about the New Testament. So just to review over what we did with Book of Mormon, how did your worksheet go? Were you able to complete the large Chiasmus from Helaman? The people in class wanted to go over that, so we did quite a bit in class and helped go over some of those big overarching macro chiasmus. One thing that was brought up in class is that finding chiasmus is very subjective. So just because what we're doing in class is taking directly from Donald Perry's book and finding what he found, it doesn't mean that when you're looking for chiasms that you're going to be finding the exact same ones. You might be finding other microchiasms, or maybe your apex doesn't fit quite what his apex was and you're finding a different chiasm. That's totally fine. So don't think that there's only one right answer when I'm giving an example of these different things. So that being said, today's just going to be a quick class. We're going to go through some overarching macro chiasmus with the 4 Gospels and then one from Acts as well. There's so many chiasms within the New Testament, within all scriptures. So basically what I'm doing is taking the overarching ones because I don't think that those are going to be readily apparent. They're more difficult to find. Versus the simple ABBA or ABCBA chiasms that you can find on your own. Some of these macro chiasms aren't readily apparent just by reading the text, and so that's what I want to discover in class so that we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. All right, so starting in with Matthew. And one thing to note with all 4 Gospels is, again, who they were directed to. Why were they written? Who were they written for? What kind of poetry style would the audience be looking for? So the book of Matthew, he's writing it to the Jews to convince them that Christ was the Messiah. So here we have an A through F chiasm, and it's interesting to note that the 2 extremes on the fins, the beginning and end, are the birth of the king, where the angel announces the birth, versus the resurrection of the king, where the angel announces the resurrection. So we have angels, beginning and end, in the book of Matthew. And since he's writing to the Jews, he's writing in a heavily chiastic pattern over his whole gospel. And note what the apex is here. It's the parables of the kingdom. It's quite a lengthy part there, 52 verses, where this is what it means. This is what Christ established when he came here. And then you can see the rest of the steps of the chiasm throughout the narrative of Christ's commission there. All right, then going on to Mark. Now, Mark is writing to the Romans. They're not going to be as familiar with a chiastic structure. They do eventually get there, but it's definitely not around this time frame. So he does have an overarching chiasm in the first 3 chapters of his gospel. And let me just kind of step through this one, because it's an interesting one. It's not a readily apparent kind of thing, but it begins with the quote, "They came to him from every quarter." And then in chapter 3, it ends with, "And a great multitude from Galilee followed him, from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, Tyre, and Sidon." So we have people coming from every quarter, and then ending with, "They followed him from every quarter," pretty much. And then stepping in to the chiasm, the miracle of healing the paralytic versus healing the man with a withered hand. And then stepping into the chiasm more, the controversy about eating with sinners versus the controversy about eating and the Sabbath. And then the apex is questions about fasting. So the Romans aren't going to really know a whole lot about fasting, and so this chiasm is kind of a nod to the Jews who are reading it, even though the whole epistle or gospel is written to the Romans. All right, this one from Luke is interesting. There's quite a few overarching chiasmus in Luke's writings, but this one is interesting. It takes the book of Luke as the top fin of the chiasmus, and then the book of Acts, which was also written by him, as the bottom fin of chiasmus. And so it shows very much that he meant his gospel to go along with the book of Acts, hand in hand, not as separate appendages. And he does a geographical chiasmus. So they start in Galilee and go to Jerusalem, and then there is the Jerusalem period, and then the ascension, meaning ascension being the presence of God or heaven. So a place instead of just what the ascension is, but the place that they go to. And then in the book of Acts, at the height of the chiasmus, he starts with the ascension again and comes backward to Jerusalem, back to Judea and Samaria, and then ends with to the ends of the earth. So they're coming from Galilee to Jerusalem and to heaven. So they're coming back into God's presence, and then they're coming back out of God's presence to the ends of the earth, spreading the gospel far and wide. All right, the book of John. John is writing to the Latter-day Saints. He's writing to the Jewish people as well, but there's going to be lots of things that he's pointing directly towards what we would understand in our latter days. So here we have the outer fins being the miracles at Cana. He starts with the water into wine, which represents a symbolic death, and then ends with the miracle at Cana, the healing of the nobleman's son, which is symbolic of resurrection. Again, this isn't his whole gospel. This is just from chapters 2 to 4. But it's an overarching chiasm that encompasses multiple chapters. So the outer fins are the miracles at Cana, and then comes inward. He cleanses the temple, and the temple is to be replaced by a new place of worship. And then moving inward, we must be born from above, versus the other half of the chiasm where Christ comes from above. And then the apex, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So again, we find that Christ, deity, is at the apex of the chiasm there. And then Hebrews 1 through 8. So this one isn't going to be like a readily apparent one unless you're reading the whole text as just straight through kind of thing. But this is Hebrews 1 through 8. And it begins and ends with, he sat down on the right hand of majesty, and then ends with, who is set on the right hand of the throne of majesty in the heavens. So at the apex, we have touched with the feeling of our infirmities, and then also with strong crying and tears. So this one is going to be one that you need to kind of study on your own. I mean, in order to explain it, I would have to read the entire Hebrews 1 through 8 and step by step it. So this one is kind of what the homework assignment is go through Hebrews 1 through 8, read it all the way through, and look at this pattern, this overarching chiastic pattern, and see what is there to be had. All right, so that's basically class. We're going to start into the practice and writing and speaking. So this week we're getting more complex in our styles. So instead of finding chiasmus, I think it's important to practice putting chiasmus together and creating. So this week we're writing a chiasmus in an ABCBA format, but both B's are going to contain parallelisms, an ABC parallelism. So we're going to practice in two different categories, and this one we're going to describe the law of the harvest. So take a minute, do that. It is a little bit more complex. You can apply it to the law of the harvest as far as like grain or wheat, agricultural things like that, or you can do it more in like husbandry with fruit trees, or I mean, there's various different things, but anything about the law of harvest. Harvest meaning you reap what you sow. So I'm going to give an example of what we came up with in class to kind of get us started. So with, we're taking like fruit trees, for example. So we begin with sow and end with reap. And then the apex of our chiasm is growth under the sun. But our B's are both maintenance. And within the maintenance, our parallelisms are going to be parallel, for one. So they need to match. The minor A, the minor B, and the minor C needs to match the other minors. So in the maintenance category, we have prep soil for the first one, and then dung for the second parallel. So prepping soil, meaning we're going to dig, we're going to add amendments and nutrients to the soil, but then throughout the season or throughout the years, the trees are going to deplete some of that nutrients, and so you need to dung around it to fertilize and keep adding things. Then in the first maintenance, our minor B is to weed, and we need to do that so it doesn't get choked out, so that it's not fighting for water and nutrients. But then at the second one is going to be pest control, that things are going to come, not necessarily at the beginning, but at a later time when there's going to be things that come and attack, try to eat what we are producing and growing. And then third is watering, both before and after. So we're watering in the seed, giving it plenty of stuff to break through and sprout, versus watering to maintain and sustain growth. So that's just a simplified pattern. Go through, if you want to change any of those things, go ahead, but start writing it out in sentence, paragraph structure. And then, moving on, same exact structure, but this time we're changing topics to either the sacrament or the ordinance of the sacrament, the blessings of the sacrament, whatever you'd like to do there. And here's a quick example of what I came up with, but we were talking about lots of different things in class, and we never did settle on one exact thing. So it's highly interpretational. You do it how you want to do it. It's very subjective. So that's the homework for the class. Study Hebrews 1 through 8 in that chiastic structure with that slide, and then practice with describing the law of harvest and about the sacrament using this complex chiastic structure. ABCBA, with the B's having parallelisms within them. All right, have a great week.